How do you improve your credit score for free? I'll show you exactly how. And if you watch until the end, I'll give you all the tools that you need to get that coveted 800 plus credit score. So let's get into it. Before you do anything else, you need to understand what a credit score is and why it's important. Your credit score is essentially a 3-digit number that determines how likely you are to pay your bills. You can think of your credit score as a passport that grants you access to the world of credit. And just like some passports get you access to more countries than others, a higher credit score is going to get you access to more and better types of credit. Credit scores were designed to be an objective and efficient way of determining a person's credit worthiness. And banks and other lenders use them to determine not only what they'll charge you, but if they'll even work with you at all. From the perspective of the bank, a person with a higher credit score represents a smaller risk. So they'll be more likely to extend this person credit and charge them a lower interest rate. On the other hand, a person with a lower credit score can represent a much higher risk, so they'll charge them a lot higher interest and may not even lend to this person at all. There are many more credit scoring models than most people realize, but the two most common are the FICO score and the Vantage score, both of which have a range of 300 to 850. For the sake of this video, we'll be focusing on the FICO score since that's the one most commonly utilized by lenders. Anytime you want to open a credit card, take out a car loan or a mortgage, or even just rent an apartment, they're going to check your credit score to determine if you are worthy. And while, yes, it's very possible to do these things with low or even no credit, it's usually way easier if you have a higher score. So to become worthy in the eyes of the lenders, the most important thing you need to understand is the factors that make up your credit score. Hey guys, real quick, just want to take a second to ask you if you could like and subscribe. It really helps out my channel and it helps get this message out to more people who can benefit from it. First, let's take a look at payment history. Making up 35% of your FICO score, payment history is the single most important factor to worry about. Now, I understand that life happens, but if you do nothing else, please just make your payments on time. Whether it's a credit card, car loan, or a mortgage, late payments can be devastating to your credit and can cause you problems way beyond just dropping your credit score. Paying a credit card even a single day late can result in you being charged a late fee of around $15 to $35. Let's say that you just opened a new credit card and scored a promotional 0% APR offer. That late payment could cause your 0% APR to revert to the default rate, which would be massively higher. If you're more than 30 days late, that late payment could be reported to the 3 credit bureaus, dropping your score and staying on your record for another 7 years. And on top of all that, if you're more than 60 days late, a card issuer could stick you with what's known as penalty APR, as high as 29.99%, which might stick around until you make up to 6 consecutive months of on-time payments. You could also lose any points or rewards that you've accrued as well, and lose the ability to accrue them any further until your account's current. So in case you didn't catch it the first time, pay your bills on time. If you don't, the longer you wait, the worse things will get. Now, if you miss one by a few days, it's not the end of the world, but to ensure that doesn't happen, I've got a few helpful tips for you. First, tap into one of the most powerful and underrated tools in all of personal finance, automation. Whether we're dealing with an installment loan like a car loan or fixed rate mortgage where your payment's the same each month, or something like a credit card where your payment can fluctuate each month, automation is not only possible, but highly recommended. By setting up automatic payments for your bills, you significantly reduce the chance of making a late payment and negatively impacting your credit score, and you save yourself some time in the process. As long as you make sure that you've got enough money in the bank account you're using to pay so that you avoid overdrafting, automatic payments are an incredible way to manage multiple accounts at the same time and make sure that you don't wake up in the middle of the night panicking because you forgot to pay off that credit card. And whether you do or don't use automatic payments, I strongly recommend setting reminders so that you can keep track of your due dates. Next, consider changing your payment due dates. Most card issuers and other companies will allow you to actually change the date your payments are due. This is going to vary depending on the type of account and company involved, but it's usually very simple. And it allows you to structure your bills in the way that works best for you. Whether it's having all your bills due after you get your first paycheck of the month or spreading them out across multiple dates, it's really nice to have options. Next, don't be afraid to work with credit card issuers. If you did happen to miss a payment and got charged a late fee, just reach out and see if they'll waive the fee. Your results are going to vary dramatically here depending on your prior history with that card issuer, but this can be a surprisingly easy way to save a little bit of money, especially if you have a good on-time payment history. Next up, we have new credit at 10% of your FICO score. This portion is all about just keeping those credit applications to a minimum and not just going out and shooting off a new credit card application every single month. Every time you or someone else requests to see your credit score or report, that's known as an inquiry. An inquiry is basically where a lender asks or inquires about your credit report from one of the credit bureaus so that they can decide if they want to lend you money. There's two types of inquiries, soft and hard. A soft inquiry does not impact your credit score and is often used for less significant decisions or things like checking your own credit score or a new employer checking your credit as part of a screening process. You really don't need to worry about soft inquiries at all, but hard inquiries are a very different story. A hard inquiry will result from you doing things like applying for a new mortgage, credit card, or car loan. You really want to be strategic with how and when you apply for credit because although new credit only makes up 10% of your FICO score, it can have a surprising impact, especially if you have limited credit history. You see, when you have no or limited credit history, the scoring model used to determine your credit score can be impacted much more by hard inquiries since there's limited information to go off of, especially compared to someone who has a strong established credit profile. To avoid unnecessarily hurting your credit score, you need to do the following when it comes to new credit. First, spread out your credit card applications. Every time you apply for a new credit card, you will generate a hard inquiry. And every time you get a hard inquiry on your report, your score is going to decrease, typically by no more than 5 points or so per inquiry, but this is going to happen whether you're denied or approved. So don't just think that because you're approved, you should go out and immediately apply for another credit card. Multiple credit card applications in a short time frame can have a negative compounding effect on your credit and may look problematic in the eyes of issuers, even for those with good credit. You see, the more hard inquiries you have on your credit report, the more negatively it impacts your score and the more red flags it raises for lenders. According to MyFICO, statistically, people with 6 inquiries or more on their credit reports can be up to 8 times more likely to declare bankruptcy than people with no inquiries on the reports. Lenders know this, and they see people with more hard inquiries on the report as higher risk. But there's one massive exception to that, and it brings me to the second new credit tip. You should rate shop things like mortgages, car loans, and student loans. Rate shopping is where you go around to different lenders looking for a similar loan to try to find the one that would be cheapest for you. It's something I really wish more people did rather than just going with the very first lender they run into, because it can potentially save you tens of thousands of dollars over time. Unlike credit cards, for these types of loans, FICO scores ignore inquiries made in the 30 days prior to scoring. So if you find a loan within 30 days, the inquiries won't affect your scores while you're shopping around for a lower rate. In addition, FICO scores look on your credit report for rate shopping inquiries older than 30 days, and if they find some, your scores will consider inquiries that fall within a typical shopping period as just one inquiry. For FICO scores calculated from the older versions of the scoring formula, the shopping period is any 14-day span, and for those from the newer versions, any 45-day span. But keep in mind that lenders choose which formula they want to use, so it's best just to keep this window as tight as possible. By grouping these types of shopping inquiries together, you can not only potentially save yourself a lot of money, but also keep your score higher in the process. And my third and final tip for new credit is to think twice about which credit cards you apply to. What I mean is that if you're 18 years old, have never had any sort of credit before, and are looking to apply to your first credit card, don't go out and try to get some crazy exclusive high-tier card right out the gate. Your chances of being approved are pretty much non-existent in that case, and you'd only be hurting yourself with a useless hard inquiry. If you're young, have no credit history, and are looking for a card, you could try something built for exactly that situation, like the Discover It Student Cashback card. Or if you have limited or poor credit history, you could try going for a secured credit card, which functions similarly to a regular credit card, but is secured by a cash deposit that you give the card issuer. Your cash deposit acts as collateral, so that in the event you don't pay your balance or just decide to dip on them, your card issuer can use that to cover your balance. Of course, assuming you stay on top of things, you can usually just get this cash deposit refunded back to you once you're done with the card. That deposit greatly reduces the risk that an issuer is taking when giving out these cards, and so as a result, they're much more likely to approve for these than a normal unsecured credit card. A card such as the Capital One Quicksilver Secured is a great example of a secured credit card that can serve as your gateway to building up from no or low credit while also earning some rewards in the process and setting yourself up for the future unsecured cards. Keep in mind that just because the approval standards are lower for secured credit cards, that doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to be approved. You may still be denied if an issuer considers you too risky due to factors like a recent bankruptcy or having no income. So just do your research and apply to the card that makes the most sense for you and spread out your applications by an appropriate amount of time. That appropriate time frame is going to vary depending on your credit profile and the specific cards that you're going for, so plan ahead to avoid getting denied. And that brings us to credit mix at 10% of your FICO score. You can think of this as the assortment of your types of credit. Your personal mix of credit cards, car loans, mortgages, and more make up this 10%. And in the eyes of creditors, they like to see that you have experience managing the various types. But I'm going to make it all a bit simpler for you. There are two types of credit: installment accounts and revolving accounts. Installment accounts are those that typically have a fixed payment each month until the balance is paid down in full, like student loans, mortgages, and car loans. Revolving accounts are those that provide you a line of credit with more flexibility, such as credit cards, HELOCs or home equity lines of credit, and retail store cards. For the sake of determining your credit mix, they're looking at both buckets, but not so much within them. For instance, if you already have a Chase Freedom card, signing up for a credit card at the hardware store down the street isn't going to help your credit mix like getting a car loan would. And just a quick side note for those of you wondering, no, payday and title loans don't count, since the lenders who issue them don't report them to the credit bureaus. But there's a big catch. If you were to stop paying on a payday or title loan and it were to get sold off to a collection agency, then it would get reported on your credit. So to make a long story short, please just don't get payday or title loans. Just don't do it. They're predatory and it'll only hurt you. Anyways, look, I don't know how else to put this, but if you're sitting around worrying about your credit mix and thinking about doing something like getting a new credit card or a loan to help, don't. Worrying about your credit mix is a complete waste of time. And frankly, it's a good way to end up spending money that you don't need to in an effort to boost one of the smallest pieces of your credit score. I'm telling you this as someone who broke the 800 mark using only credit cards. No car loan, no mortgage, or anything else. As of today, I'm still sitting at over an 800. But keep in mind, this wasn't some overnight thing. It took me years to get to that point. And of course, once I did start adding other things into the credit mix, I noticed my score go higher over time. But again, this isn't something you want to go out and take unnecessary loans out for. Trying to boost your credit score by way of credit mix, especially when you're already in excellent standing, is really just throwing money away. Don't use credit mix as a poor excuse to say, well, I guess I just got to go out and get some more debt. Got to get that credit score higher. You'll get a much higher return on your time and effort by focusing on just about anything else. Next up, we have amounts owed at 30% of the FICO score. Now, as you can imagine, having less debt's a good thing, not just for you, but also in the eyes of lenders. But amounts owed isn't just accounting for the total amount of debt you have. It's also taking into account things like how much you owe on credit cards versus installment loans, how much of an installment loan you still owe versus the original amount, and most importantly of all, your credit utilization. This is the part we really want to focus on, since credit utilization is one of the most important factors making up your entire credit score. But listen closely, because there's some big misconceptions here that could end up costing you a ton of money. Credit utilization is referring to the balances that you owe on your credit cards relative to the credit limit of those cards. You can calculate it by dividing your credit card statement balance from the end of a monthly billing cycle by the credit limit of that card. This will give you a percentage where usually higher is worse and lower is better. For example, let's say that you have one credit card with a statement balance of $3,000 and a credit limit of $10,000. By dividing the statement balance by the credit limit, you're left with a utilization ratio of 30%, which is right at the top edge of what most experts consider to be the maximum limit that you should ever let your utilization get to. Anything above 30% will hinder your credit score in a significant way. Generally, you'll want to do everything you can to keep your utilization as low as possible and in the range of 0 to 10%. As you can see here in this data directly from the Credit Bureau Experian, individuals with the highest credit scores tend to have low single-digit utilization ratios. Now, if you have more than one card or revolving account, you'll want to use this same formula, but be sure to include all the credit cards, HELOCs, and even cards that you've been added as an authorized user on. This is important because your score is dependent not only on your per account utilization, but also on your overall utilization. And you want your utilization to be low, not only for each account, but also overall. What this means is that you could have an overall utilization that's pretty low, but if you have one card that's maxed out or close to it, that could negatively impact your score. And real quick, I want to address one of the points that has to do with what's considered to be the best utilization ratio. We know that lower is better, but a lot of people are correct in pointing out that 0% utilization may actually be worse for your credit score than something like 1 or 2%. And while this is correct, there are some really important things that you need to consider. First, carrying a balance that incurs even a single dollar in interest in an effort to keep your utilization in the recommended range is idiotic. Seriously, man, you're choosing to pay potentially hundreds or thousands of dollars in interest in an effort to boost your credit score, and you don't even know by how much? If you do this, just do me a quick favor. Square up, because I'm about to reach through the screen and slap the taste out your mouth. Just pay off your card in full every month before interest is applied, and you'll be fine. Yes, technically, it's possible to time your payments so that higher utilization is reported to the bureaus and you don't also accrue any interest in the process, but that's going to take extra time and effort and planning that not everyone is equipped for. Don't overcomplicate things and accidentally mix up your dates and end up paying more than you have to. I'm saying this as someone who got to an 800 plus credit score using only credit cards and never incurring a single dollar in interest, and never once worrying about when my utilization was being reported to the bureaus. Could I have gotten there sooner if I intentionally made an effort to keep something like 1 or 2% utilization? Sure, probably. But I'm going to tell you something that's going to blow your mind. Who cares? Now, since amounts owed and specifically credit utilization make up such a large part of your credit score, most of the effort that you can make to boost your score is going to be focused here. Here's a few tips that can help you do so. First, pay off your credit card balances. I know, crazy, right? Who would have thought of that one? But seriously, pay down your credit cards like your life depends on it. Reducing your credit card balances will almost always improve your credit score in the long term, and even more importantly than that, save you a massive amount of money in interest. It really is troubling just how nonchalant people are about credit card debt. And while yes, there are people who are in credit card debt because they just simply have no other way to make ends meet, there are just as many people, if not more, who are in debt because they lack proper budgeting and impulse control. To handle this, there's two general methods you can explore for debt paydown: the snowball method and the avalanche method. The snowball method's been popularized by Dave Ramsey and involves paying down your smallest balance debts first before moving on to the next smallest balance. The idea here is that as you roll the money used for the smallest balance onto the next, this amount snowballs and grows bigger and bigger. This method's great for people who maybe aren't quite as disciplined when it comes to their finances and could use that extra shot of dopamine that comes from paying off your balances quicker, even if it is just one of these smaller debts to begin with. On the other end, the avalanche method focuses on paying down your highest interest rate debts first. And similarly to the snowball method, once your highest interest rate debt is paid off, you then roll that money to the next highest interest rate debt you have to pay it off. This method will often help you save more money in the long run since you're eliminating the most costly debt first before it can accrue even more interest. But even if it is more mathematically sound, those who need a little bit more upfront encouragement may find that the snowball method gives them a little bit more reward that they're looking for. Either way, just please pay down your debt. While paying down your debt's the most obvious and most beneficial way to decrease your utilization and thus increase your credit score, this next method is actually much quicker, easier, and is something you can do right now. Request a credit limit increase. This is where you reach out to your credit card company either online or over the phone and just simply ask them to increase your credit limit. Now, they're probably going to ask you some questions to confirm things like your income, employment status, and maybe even why you want the increase in the first place, but this is usually very quick and easy. Each card issuer has its own method of assessing credit limit increases. Some only do soft inquiries, whereas others do hard. Some will approve you immediately, whereas others can take as long as a month. So it's important for you to do some preliminary research before requesting an increase. And if you have exceptionally poor credit, a history of missing payments, have ever maxed out a card, or just simply haven't had the card in question for very long, don't be surprised if they deny your request. The last thing you want is to get another useless hard inquiry on your credit report because you didn't do your research and went and applied when you stood next to no chance of being approved. But if you do get approved, a credit limit increase is such a quick and easy way to boost your score. Let's say that you have one card with a $1,000 limit and have $200 on it come statement closing time. That's a 20% utilization ratio, which is getting up there considering you've only spent $200. If you were to apply and get approved for a limit increase to $4,000, assuming you have the same balance of $200, your utilization ratio is now only 5%, which is a massive improvement for doing something that only takes a few minutes. Here's a couple tips to help you increase your chances of getting approved. First, reduce any outstanding debt as much as possible before requesting the credit limit increase. I know, reducing your utilization is the whole reason you're asking in the first place, but by having less debt at the time of your request, you're going to look better in the eyes of the issuer. Second, confirm with the issuer before you submit the request if it'll be a hard or a soft inquiry. If it's just a soft inquiry, the stakes are much lower than if it's a hard one. If it is a hard inquiry, you'll want to treat that just like applying to a whole new credit card and not do it too close to any other hard inquiries or applications. Third, include all of your income sources. Issuers actually allow you to include certain alternative sources of income that you have access to. This could include your spouse's or partner's income, disability benefits, alimony, child support, investment income, and more. And also, if your income's increased since originally applying to the card, be sure to update that. If an issuer sees that your income has increased, they're generally much more likely to approve you for a credit limit increase. Also, card issuers will periodically grant limit increases entirely on their own without you having to do anything at all. I've actually had this happen multiple times where I get a random email from one of my card issuers telling me that my excellent credit history has earned me an increase. I wouldn't necessarily count on this though unless you're incredibly patient. That being said, credit limits are a double-edged sword. If you have trouble managing your credit card debt and have a tendency to use whatever credit's available to you and max out your cards, requesting a credit limit increase could be a huge mistake. A lot of people have trouble conceptualizing what their credit limit actually means. You can't look at a $5,000 limit and say, oh wow, I've got an extra $5,000 to spend. Your credit limit is not the same as cash in your pocket. Yes, there are cards out there that'll give you access to part of your credit line as a cash advance, but thinking that you can do this without any fees or getting slammed by interest is wishful thinking. Just because I've got a credit limit of around $160,000 available to me doesn't mean I'm just going out and spending a ton of money. Limits that high can be amazing for your utilization, but in the wrong hands can lead you to accrue a mountain of debt that you'll almost never get out of. The next method for decreasing your utilization and increasing your credit score is consolidating your debt. There's a few different ways you could do this depending on your situation. The first method involves getting a personal debt consolidation loan. Now keep in mind that doing so entails that you're opening up a new loan, but you're doing so with the sole purpose of consolidating and hopefully eliminating your credit card debt. Doing this is going to accomplish two things. First, it's going to help your utilization by reducing the amount of revolving account debt you have and converting that into an installment loan. And second, it'll save you a pretty significant amount in interest since debt consolidation loans typically have lower interest rates than credit cards. Although you're still paying interest with this method, it can come in handy if you've racked up a really large amount of credit card debt. The key is just to not go out and run your credit cards right back up again. The second method for consolidating debt involves opening a balance transfer credit card. This also accomplishes several things. First, opening up a new credit card to help improve your score may seem counterintuitive, but assuming you get approved, the credit limit of that new card is going to immediately reduce your utilization ratio. And second, there's cards out there with 0% interest promotional sign-up offers for balance transfers. This means that you could transfer part or all of your balance from another card and have a 0% interest rate on this balance for as long as 21 months in some cases. Here are a few things you need to keep in mind if you're considering this route. You'll still have to make at least a minimum monthly payment. Just because interest isn't accruing during your 0% promotional period doesn't mean that you don't have to pay. The upside, of course, is that every dollar you pay is going towards principal and not interest during this time, so you can really chip away at that balance. Also, your promotional rate may apply to balance transfers, purchases, or both. Make sure you read the details very carefully if you go this route, because you may find out the hard way that you're still being charged interest on purchases you're making with your new card, even if it isn't accruing on your balance transfer. Also, as I mentioned earlier, missing a payment can result in your 0% offer being canceled, and depending on the terms, you may even face retroactive interest charges which would defeat the entire purpose of you doing this method. Lastly, most cards with a 0% interest promotional offer will still charge you a one-time fee of 3 to 5% of the balance that you're transferring to them. While this isn't necessarily a deal breaker, and you should still save quite a bit of money considering the interest you would have been accruing otherwise, you still want to run the numbers because that fee can still add up to $300 to $500 per $10,000 that you transfer. That being said, there are some unicorn cards out there with 0% balance transfer offers, no annual fees, and no charge for making the balance transfer. An example being the low-rate credit card from BECU. But remember that even if you don't open a card for the sake of doing a balance transfer, just opening up any card period will increase your total available credit and decrease your utilization. Like I said before though, if managing debt's a problem for you, don't even think about doing this. Your first step needs to be to put in place an effective budget and plan to pay down the debt you already have so that you don't just dig yourself deeper in an effort to squeeze out a tiny little bit of a higher credit score. Next up, we have length of credit history at 15% of your FICO score. This part's kind of like those job postings you see where they want 5 years of experience for a so-called entry-level position. Unfortunately, credit can be the same way at the beginning. You need credit to build credit. And getting any credit when you're coming from nothing can be a bit of a hurdle. This is where your strategy really comes into play. If you have no credit and are looking to build it up, a great option could be a secured credit card or getting added as an authorized user to someone else's card who you can trust and has good credit themselves. But we'll come back to that in a bit. The most important thing to keep in mind when it comes to your length of credit history is that unless you have a very good reason to close them, you should leave your credit cards open. This section accounts for several factors. How long your credit accounts have been open, including age of your newest, oldest, and the average age of all of your accounts, as well as how long specific credit accounts have been open. Let's say that you have 2 credit cards. One you opened 11 years ago when you turned 18, and one that you opened 4 years ago when you turned 25. Now that you're 29, this would make your newest account around 4 years old, oldest 11 years old, and your average age of credit around 7.5 years, which is considered good by most scoring models. Now, if you were to close your oldest card just because you want to tidy up your finances, you now only have the card that's 4 years old, making that now your oldest account and also your average account age. Now, rather than falling within the good range, most models will put you on the poor side of the range, dropping your credit score and potentially hindering it for years to come. You better have a really good reason to close a card, especially if it's your oldest. Now, of course, something like an annual fee can be a completely valid reason for closing a card, but closing it just because you don't use it as much anymore is not as good of a reason. This is actually one of the rare exceptions where I would say that even if you have trouble controlling your spending and managing your debt, it may still benefit you to keep that card open if you follow this one trick. You've heard of cutting cards, right? Well, in this situation, you could quite literally cut the card up and get rid of it without ever actually closing the card. Now, the issuer isn't going to magically know somehow that you've done this, and the card is going to effectively stay open, and you can continue to reap the benefits of the increased age of credit and better utilization ratio. Just make sure it doesn't have any lingering balances or fees. Keep in mind that if you do go this route, most card issuers will eventually look to close out the card if it goes unused for long enough. So what you can do is just put a cheap recurring charge like Netflix or something like that and set it to auto pay so that you don't forget about it. Usually they'll give you notice when they're about to close the card out, but this isn't guaranteed, so make sure you stay on top of it. All that being said, as long as you use credit responsibly, your length of credit history is another example of something that'll benefit from you getting several cards early on in your credit building journey. I opened my first credit card, the Discover It card, when I was around 18 or 19, and still keep it open and use it to this day, even with over 13 additional cards. Personally, length of credit history has always been one of the most frustrating portions of the credit pie for me to look at because they don't really consider you in the excellent range until you're at about 8 years for your oldest credit card. Patience is key here. This 15% portion isn't really something you can boost in the short term, but it is something that will definitely hurt you if you make poor decisions. All right, so now you're familiar with all the factors that make up your credit score, but I've got a few more really valuable tips, so stick around. By far, one of the easiest methods for boosting your credit score in the least amount of time is credit piggybacking. This is when you get added as an authorized user to someone else's credit card, which ties you to their credit profile. The authorized user now gets to piggyback off the other person's credit, hopefully giving a boost to their own in the process and giving them access to a credit card that they might not have been able to get on their own. It can be incredibly effective and beneficial for both people involved, but listen very closely because things can go very wrong. There's several key points you need to understand when it comes to authorized users so that you don't get caught with any surprises. First, an authorized user doesn't actually have to have access to the card. As I mentioned before, you generally only want to be added on someone's card as an authorized user who has good credit history and who you can trust moving forward. But what happens if they don't trust you? After all, an authorized user has the ability to max out a card and technically isn't responsible for any of the debt. So it may be a hard sell to convince someone to add you onto theirs. This means that an authorized user could cause a lot of damage to a primary card holder if they're not careful. This is where you have some decisions to make. If there is any hesitancy to add you to the card, you could always bring up the fact that you don't actually need to have access to the card. What I mean is that just because someone's added as an authorized user, that doesn't mean that they need to physically have the card in their possession. Without having a physical card, the card info, or the login information, an authorized user won't be able to run up a balance on the primary card holder. In almost all cases, the card's mailed to the primary card holder, so you don't have to worry about an authorized user ever seeing it, and you can even request the card company to not mail a card at all. This will give them a little more peace of mind, and you still gain the benefits of piggybacking off their credit. Second, credit history reporting varies. With some lenders, when you're added as an authorized user to someone's card, they will give you that person's credit history with that particular card. This means that if the card was 10 years old at the time that you were added as an authorized user, it could look as though you have a 10-year-old account on your credit report, even though you were just added. Some lenders will grant the entire payment history, others just a couple years, and others will just look at things from the date that you were actually added as an authorized user. But keep in mind that late payments made by the primary card holder will affect you here. So if a card grants you the history of the primary card holder going back 2 years and they had a late payment during that time, that could negatively impact you. Alternatively, if the card doesn't grant you history, then that same missed payment wouldn't affect your score. So it's important to do your research and understand what your card in question does when it comes to history before you jump in. And third, you can remove yourself from the card. An authorized user might not be responsible for the debt on the card, but that doesn't save them from being negatively impacted by a missed payment or high utilization. Let's say that for some reason the balance on the card's gotten pretty high, and you're worried not only about the hit to your utilization, but the fact that the primary card holder might make a late payment in the future due to that balance. In most cases, either you or the primary card holder can remove yourself as an authorized user at any time. But what if a late payment already happened and dropped your score? Well, good news, and something not a lot of people know. You can still remove yourself as an authorized user, and by disputing the account on your credit report after the fact, you could potentially have it removed from your record. And fourth, authorized user accounts aren't the same as your own accounts on your credit report. Let's say that you've improved your credit score quite a bit using credit piggybacking and you're now thinking about buying a house. Well, you may be surprised to find that some lenders still don't want to give you a mortgage. This is because lenders use different credit scoring models for different purposes. And for larger loans that typically carry more risk, they're going to use models that are a bit more stringent. Lenders recognize that you can boost your score pretty easily with credit piggybacking, and so they want to see a healthy history of accounts in your own name too, especially for larger loans. So does this mean to just forget about authorized users? Absolutely not. But it does mean that even though you may get a boost from being added as an authorized user, you need to plan to take steps to build credit in your own name and through other methods. Now, before we move on to the next tips, I want to address the idea that you don't need credit. Popularized by Dave Ramsey, a lot of people are drawn to the idea of just simply eschewing credit altogether. I'll tell you right now that the idea you can only get a high credit score by paying interest is completely false. I speak from personal experience, but it is very possible to go your entire life without utilizing credit. Incredibly uncommon, but possible. And a lot of people don't know that you can still do things like get a mortgage even without any credit through a process known as manual underwriting. Trying to go creditless may be a viable approach for some people, but in the current environment we live in where wages are outpaced by inflation and it seems like everything just keeps getting more and more expensive, this just isn't an optimal approach. The reality is that the world has evolved drastically over the past decades, and someone earning an average wage is going to find that their money just doesn't go as far these days. By taking steps to build your credit score in an intelligent way and use debt responsibly, regular people can ensure that when they do need to tap into their credit, they can get the lowest rates possible. No, credit card rewards aren't going to make you rich. That's not the point. But they can potentially put thousands of dollars back in your pocket for things that you were already going to buy anyways. Now, moving on. Second, do not pay for a credit score or report. There are just about a million different ways that you can get your credit score for free, such as through your credit card's online portal, a reputable site like Credit Karma, or one of the 3 credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Federal law used to allow you to get a free copy of your credit report from each of the 3 major credit bureaus once every 12 months. But thanks to the crazy year that was 2020, they made them available every single week. And now, as of several months ago, that program's been made permanent. So by going to annualcreditreport.com, you can receive your free weekly credit reports from the 3 bureaus. If you haven't already, do this early and do it often. It's a great way to keep an eye out for potential errors on your report, as well as catch any identity theft and fraud early. Please don't pay for any credit repair services, and please ignore any of the spam comments you see that are offering a million different ways for you to boost your credit through their system. They're all just trying to scam you. Third, last but not least, and one of the quickest and easiest ways to boost your credit, explore alternative credit reporting methods. In response to the demand to build up your credit score when you have no or limited credit, there has been an absolute explosion in alternative credit reporting services over the past few years. Tools like Experian Boost allow you to connect your bills, things like streaming services, internet bills, and even rent into their system. They look at your prior billing history to see that you've been paying your bills on time, and then add that to your credit profile where it can then boost your credit score. Now, Experian Boost isn't the only service out there that does this, but this is one of the more popular and trustworthy ones since it's offered directly by one of the 3 main bureaus. Here's an actual screenshot from someone I just helped boost their score by 40 points in a matter of minutes just before I recorded this video. So again, do your research and you may find some pretty effective ways to build credit even without getting a credit card. So to wrap things up, you should have a much better understanding of credit now. And like me, you're probably wondering why they never taught half this stuff in school. Credit's important, like really important, and it's not something you want to mess around with. So whether you have no credit, low credit, or average and just trying to improve your credit, save this video and come back to reference it later on. I wanted to create a sort of all-encompassing ultimate guide here that you can come back and reference anytime to help you in your credit journey. So what are you waiting for? Get out there. Use what I've taught you to improve your credit. Thanks again for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and always remember to be sensible.